Welcome back to What You Will Learn. My name is Adam Ashton.
G'day. My name is Adam Jones, mate. We just had a cracking interview with Timber Hawkeye.
Timber Hawkeye, the author of Buddhist Boot Camp and Faithfully Religionless.
So his books are required reading in some schools in the US. He's doing a lot to show how the East or the Buddhism can help you in your life as a Westerner, usually the reader.
Yeah, so he was in corporate America and eventually came to realise that that's probably not the life he wanted to live. And he lived for a little while in a monastery, and he basically is trying to bring back some of those principles and teachings to help people live you don't have to become a full Buddhist, but everyone can apply Buddhist principles to their life.
Yeah, so love it. So I hope you guys get out of it as much as we did. We loved chatting to him, and we loved his book as well. So yeah, we got stuck in. Should we get stuck,
All right. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, well, it was actually good. We got to do Buddhist Boot Camp and Faithfully Religionless again, so that was good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the message from both of them is similar, but the delivery is completely different. One is more of storytelling, and the other one is a bunch of short stories. Mm-hmm. So, I'm curious, did you prefer one over the other?
I read Buddhist Boot Camp first. I actually think I preferred Faithfully Religionless because I was curious about a bit of your story, and you were able to work, as you say, pretty similar ideas, but worked in that way. I think I preferred Faithfully Religionless.
Yeah, I did too.
And Timber, we have to ask straight away. Timber Hawkeye. It's not a name you hear every day. That's not the real name, is it?
No, and I talk about that in the book. When I moved from Israel to the States, no one could pronounce my birth name, and I got the nickname Timber, and it just sort of stuck. And then in '95, my first graphic design was published, and when they asked me what name to put with the logo, I said, well, Timber. And they said, well, what's Timber's last name? And I was in college. The company that the design was made for was in New York. And I tried to tell them the story. They were not interested in hearing it. They were just trying to get me off the phone. And I lived on Hawkeye Street, and I said Hawkeye, and I hung up, and I thought, Timber Hawkeye, that sounds good. And so I had my name legally changed to Timber Hawkeye back in 1995. So that's what's on my driver's license. That's what's, yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
So growing up, you went from like a real Western influence, and you got influenced by the East at some stage. So in the book, you were talking about you used to drink a lot, you used to get girls, smoking, all that kind of stuff. So can you talk a little bit of that and how you were influenced by the East, or how that got introduced into your life, the Buddhism?
One of the first books I read was called Meditation by Eknath Easwaran, and the book is out of print now. But part of what he instilled in me was the idea that, to think of your body like a jacket that you get to wear, but you only get one jacket for your whole life. And so how would you treat that jacket? Would you throw it on the ground every day when you came home, or would you take really good care of it because you want to keep that jacket for as long as you can? So I was reading that while still partying and everything. And then one day I went to the bar right after reading it again, and I sat down and I ordered my usual drink. And then for whatever reason, that thought entered into my mind. Like, they talk so much about how alcohol is toxic. And I thought, if I can come up with one good reason to pick up that drink, then I'll do it. And it's been 15 years, and I've yet to come up with a good reason to pick it up. And that's kind of been my filter in, it was really logic that brought me to Buddhism. It wasn't an infatuation with, all the deities or anything like that. It's just made logical sense. Like, hey, take good care of yourself. Yeah. And so when I'm tempted to eat something deep fried or drink something that's not good, I just think to myself, like, can you come up with a single good reason other than it tastes good, to do this? And if I can't, I don't. So
nice. Well, down that line, can you give us some of the basics of Buddhism? I guess as a real beginner, if someone had never heard anything about it, what are some of the absolute basics? I guess.
Well, there's a common misconception that Buddhism can be encapsulated into something very simple, and much like any other tradition or even some religions, there's 800 different schools of Buddhism. So it can get very complicated, and it makes sense because when the teachings went from India to China, they got a little Chinese culture flavor, and then when the teachings went to Tibet, when the teachings went to Thailand, and that's why you see Korean Buddhists and, Japanese, and the Japanese tradition is very much engulfed in a lot of Zen. But in its simple source, Buddhism is not a religion in any way. There is no concept of creation, of how the world began, which is kind of consistent with all other world traditions. There is no God figure, someone who created it all and when it all started. Any reference in Buddhism to a higher power refers to nothing outside your own body. And it implies that it's within you, but that means also it's within everyone you look and see and in everything. I think there's a direct correlation between that and even some of Jesus's teachings, when he said the kingdom of God is inside you and all around you. And, God, if I'm God, I'm the son of God, and we are all brothers and sisters, then we are all children of God. So this so it's a lot of it is left for interpretation, but as it may, Buddhism is not a religion, which is why you will find people who are Christian and practicing Buddhist or Jewish and Buddhist, because it actually strengthens your existing faith, whatever it is. And that's what I like about the Dalai Lama instruction is go ahead and study Buddhism, but don't study it in order to be a Buddhist. Yep. Study Buddhism to be a better whatever you already are.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. So do you think, say with Jesus, when Christianity started, do you think some of his teachings maybe got a little bit misguided by the church over history, whereas he might have had a different idea at the time of where that is now? Or?
Who knows? It's been transliterated, and these are stories told about someone 100 years after it occurred. So a lot of stuff is lost and I don't think it. My practice has been, after studying religion and psychology simultaneously, to understand not just what people believe, but why we believe what we do. I realized that it's kind of detrimental to study religion or Buddhism in a scholarly sense, to try and memorize sutras or what did Jesus actually say, and just loosen the grip a little bit and realize no one knows what he or even the Buddha ever actually said, but what is the intention? And I think the intention behind a lot of these teachings and philosophies and is all very much to unite us and to make us realize just how important we are and what an impact we can have, a positive impact we can have on ourselves and the world around us. So I can't answer that. I don't know what was Jesus's intentions.
Difficult question.
But I trust that they would.
Then after, so you said you had that little bit of glimpse into Buddhism, and then you went full on. Is that right? You went overseas.
It was an interesting. It's kind of how I operate. I don't slowly go into the pool. I just jump into the deep end.
Nice.
And I think the full immersion, just kind of like when I moved to the States and I didn't speak a word of English. And I had the option to go through the very slow process and even go to school with my cousins who also spoke Hebrew and all, to have them help me. And I said, no, the only way I'm going to learn is full immersion.
Yeah.
And the pendulum was kind of swinging. I think I wasn't searching for religion. I wasn't searching for an answers. Much like many people at that point where you're fed up with the corporate world and you're just looking for a way out, I was escaping, and I chose something that made logical sense. It was a simple and uncomplicated life. It was a great opportunity. The Buddhist teachings definitely resonated with me, but then that's when, of course, I realized how complicated that world can be. Yeah. There's so much dogma even within that world. And I said, no, that's what I was running away from. This is complicated. So as the pendulum swung, I thought, there's really a middle path, which is to honor the ancient teachings, but find a way to implement them into our daily lives. Yeah. And that's what I hope to offer others is to say, this wasn't only applicable back 2,000 years ago, or if you're a monk living in a monastery, but if you can find inner peace in downtown Los Angeles, you can find it anywhere. And that's the key. And that's why I'm doing this the way I do it, because it's the only way is to lead by example.
So how would, because they seem like two opposite ends of the spectrum, say some of the Buddhist teachings and say the corporate world where there's power games and, there's a bit of a whole show. So how do you implement some of the Buddhism, the Buddhist principles into, say, if you're fully entrenched in the corporate world?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because even within the Buddhist monastery, you will see that there's a power trip, that there is a hierarchy, that someone's like, well, I'm a better Buddhist than you, like it's really funny. But that was a really good glimpse that the problem isn't the corporate world, the problem isn't Buddhism, the problem isn't Los Angeles or Sydney or London or any big cities, that people tend to blame the problem on things outside themselves. But the problem is the ego within. And the ego is going to come out whether you're trying to be a Zen priest or if you're trying to be a CEO. So I think the applicability of the teachings is really imperative in whatever you do. And so to keep the ego in check. And by that I mean if there is a quote-unquote God within, if there is someone really kind and compassionate and patient and giving and forgiving within you, and then there's also a very greedy, power-hungry, shallow, angry, hateful person within you. And even as kids, when we grew up, we saw that in cartoons, an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. The idea that there are two voices within us competing for our attention is known to everyone. What the Buddhist tradition does is it says, okay, we honor both of those voices. We acknowledge there's an ego within, but there's also a God within. And we invite you to make a commitment to follow the God within. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so you see the ego and you say, I see you, but I'm going to listen to God instead. And it's just it's a path of finding, and whether, again, you're in the corporate world or at a monastery or in a relationship or not, you find a way to acknowledge, where is this directive coming from? Is it my ego, or is it the compassionate, kind, and patient part of me? And you can personify them. Like there's a Gandhi within and there's a Hitler within. Yeah. I love those because they were just men. And they presented a perfect example of what happens when you follow forgiveness and kindness and what happens when you follow greed and hatred. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. So is it being, like with the ego, you're best off for taking the Eastern principles in, you're best off being conscious of the ego first? Is that just being aware that of the two different parts of you first, or
at least two? Some of us have a whole lot more voices than that in our heads. And in fact, a friend of mine has a practice she calls naming her demons, in the sense that if you're prone to anger, for example, you give your anger a name. Because when you get angry, you literally do things that you normally wouldn't do, or you get jealous, or so give those emotions, feelings a name, and don't identify with them and say, that's not who I want to be. That's someone else. And the ego, it's like, that's not me. That's this. It's like when your thoughts are being hijacked by the ego, and to really acknowledge it, but identify with your intentions and go from there. And that's why it's called a practice, because the more years in your life you've practiced listening to the ego, the harder it is going to be to let it go. And I don't think the point is to destroy the ego, because then you're focusing all your attention on the ego, which the ego loves, and then it just keeps getting bigger. It's just to acknowledge it, to say, I see you, but I'm going to listen to this other guy instead. Yeah, Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I think that was good. We did a good 20-25 minute episode on some of our favourite bits of Buddhist boot camp, but we wanted to get a bit more insight from yourself about some of our favourite bits. One of the parts I really liked, I guess, something along the lines of pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yes, that's, if you were to encapsulate all of the Buddhist teachings into one sentence, that is it. That pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Yeah, nice. Sorry. Can you tell us a little bit more?
So how do you choose not to suffer?
Well, you realize that the suffering is a choice. So that's the first thing. Like if you're stuck in traffic, for example, or if you're going through a hard time, I think a really good example of this is when a man said, I was sad because I didn't have shoes, but then I met a man who didn't have feet. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden that you realize that we create so much of our own suffering in our mind because we create a story and we label our situation and we say, this is bad, this is horrible, this is wrong, I'm stuck in traffic. And it's like, you're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic, you're part of the problem. Saying that you're stuck in traffic, it implies that everybody else is in your way, and you're creating your own suffering by thinking that you are somehow superior to others and that this shouldn't happen. But when you step outside of that, then the discomfort of going 2 miles an hour is unfortunate. But you'd be like, I'm just going to pop in an audiobook and I'm going to enjoy this time. Yeah. Or I'm going to sit here and get angry and yell and honk my horn and give the finger to everyone who drives by. It's like, so it's about perspective. So I think pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. It makes you realize the pain is there. Yeah. But whether we identify with it and create a story around it, and that's totally optional. And this is, of course, a very simplified explanation of that sentence, but because we could talk for hours just about that.
Absolutely.
People always go, my knee really hurts. I'm not imagining it.
Yeah.
It's not about telling someone or minimizing their pain at all. It's acknowledging the pain, but you're focusing on what you can't do, whereas you can take a step back and go, well, what can I do? And then you realize that the list of blessings in your life is significantly longer than the hardships. And then you live in gratitude and you can be happy even if your knee hurts and you're stuck in traffic, quote unquote.
Yeah, amazing. And I think that also leads, you said that building a story around it leads into also the feelings versus emotions. Can you tell us the difference between feelings and emotions?
In a nutshell, a feeling, we all have them, and a feeling lasts between 45 seconds and a minute and a half. That's it. And we all feel, that we're totally happy and totally sad and then disappointed and then excited, all throughout one day. In fact, we'll use the traffic. You're stuck in traffic and you're very upset, but then your favorite song comes on the radio and you're dancing in your seat, then somebody cuts you off and you get really angry and then you get home and you're relieved. And that's perfectly natural. That's how feelings do. They come and they go. But an emotion is when you take that feeling of, let's say, anger because somebody cut you off, and you write a story around it. You say, it's always those jerks in BMWs. Yeah. And now you have a story around it that it's, and the following week you can see a BMW and you will get angry all over again. That car could be parked. It's not even doing anything. But now you have a story around it. And that's how we can create, and that's how an emotion can last for 20, 30 years, and you can still be angry about something today that happened 10 years ago. Mind you, what happened 10 years ago, upsetting as it was, it happened and it's gone. It's over. It's 10 years ago. The only thing that brings it back to the present is the story. It's the emotion. It's the inability to let it go. And every time you tell that story to someone or to yourself, you're reliving it. You're reinforcing that, and that's how people can hold a grudge for years, and it's just not healthy, and it's definitely not harming the other people. It's only harming you. That's toxic weight that we choose to carry. That's totally unnecessary.
Absolutely.
Nice. So in the Buddhist boot camp, you talk about working part-time to live full-time. Is that something you still do, or can you
Absolutely. You think someone would say, you know what, working part-time is just not working for me. I want to go back to 60 hours. I think once it's a question of values. When you start valuing your free time a lot more than tangible material things, it readjusts your life. And people, what would they say in Fight Club? That we work jobs we hate so we can buy stuff we don't need to impress people we don't like. And a lot of people are doing that. I used to do that day in and day out, working, and I had 3 cars, and I had the condo, and But I was miserable. All I did was work. And my focus was work. And my life was work. And one day, one of the other paralegals at the law firm was celebrating her 30-year anniversary. And the fact that she was celebrating 30 years in a cubicle terrified me. Because I saw that that's where my life was headed. And I wanted something different. And I had started visiting Hawaii regularly, and the island lifestyle that was much slower pace very much appealed to me. And I realized it was right around the time that I had paid off all my debt, and for many years I was sending, $1,000 every month to pay off my credit card debt for all my expenses when I was younger. And then I realized one day, I was like, this is the last check. This is the last time I have to send this money to the credit card company. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with that extra $1,000 next month when I don't have to send it to them? And I realized, well, I don't have to make it. I can just work less. So that kind of became a game, like, oh, how much less? Like how little work can I do? How little money do I need to make? And I realized that when I just look, if I live somewhere where I don't have to have a car, I can get around on a bicycle or walk everywhere. And if I live somewhere where the weather is nice all year round, and then I can enjoy the outdoors all the time, I can go hiking, backpacking. And, when you live somewhere cold and you want to get together with your friends, you often do it at a restaurant or a bar or something. You're spending money, to just hang out with your friends. But in Hawaii, you just go to the beach.
Yeah,
so it's free.
Yeah.
So the beach is free, hiking is free, playing volleyball is free, tennis is free. So everything I loved to do was free. So for me, it made sense to move to Hawaii. I'm not suggesting that everybody sell everything they own in Hawaii, but I am suggesting that we all have our Hawaii, whatever that looks like. And, we're all busy by choice. So the first thing is stop complaining about it and reevaluate, is it really worth working 50, 60 hours a week to have these things? Because the things aren't going to bring you happiness. Happiness is sustained regardless of outside influence. If you find inner peace and happiness, then it doesn't matter if you have stuff. In fact, you're often happier without it, with the less stuff. And that's what I found, is that the less stuff I owned, the happier I was, and the less stuff I needed. And I was just free. I could just up and go and move somewhere, or be gone for 3 weeks at a time, or because I didn't have, a mortgage or a house, or, so it was very liberating, if nothing else, is to live a simple and uncomplicated life.
It's unreal. In the book also, you talk about going on a media diet. Can you explain a little about why you'd go on a media diet, or what are the benefits of doing something like this?
Because we don't just eat with our mouths. We eat with our eyes and our ears as well. And and when you eat toxic stuff, your stomach is upset. You feel it very quickly. And when we consume negativity and war and paranoia and anger and violence, we also experience it. We become paranoid, we become fearful, and then we start making fear-based decisions. So, you are what you eat. But it's important to remember that we are consuming stuff with our eyes and our ears, with the music we listen to, the newspaper we choose to or not to read, TV shows, movies that we choose to watch. They're all affecting us, whether we realize it or not. And I think, again, a really good example of this is if you're driving down the road on the highway and you're listening to very fast music, you're probably going to drive a whole lot faster.
Yeah.
And if you slow it down, then you're just chilling, on the side. I was going to say on the right lane, which is the slow lane, but I think the right lane is the fast lane for you.
That's right, yeah.
Then you could just be in the slow lane and just not be in a hurry, because you don't have that outside influence rushing you. And so it's very important to realize how much of the stress in our lives is created by us, by the choices that we make. If we choose to live in a stressful environment or work in a stressful job, we can't blame the job. We chose the job. We can't blame the relationship. We chose to be in it. We can't, we do a lot of pointing the finger away from us. And I think what Buddhism does is it invites you to look in the mirror and go, how are you creating your own suffering, and how can you stop?
Nice.
Awesome.
I love it.
Yeah, that was awesome. Can we just we'll change gears a little bit? Obviously, you must read a lot because every chapter's got an amazing quote, and you're also very quotable yourself. I love some of the some of your sentences that you've crafted. What are some of your favorite books?
Oh my gosh. How much time do we have?
Can of worms.
I would definitely say The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer is one of the first books that comes to mind, because I remember reading it, and it's one of those books that you read a paragraph and then you have to stop and you have to read it again and then again and you just, because it just shifts your perspective so much, and it just introduces some really, really important, so it's not a very thick book by any means, but it takes a long time to read because every single thing readjusts your perception of the world. And those are the kinds of books that I love to read, that have me question everything I think I know. And when I'm done reading it, I don't know more. I acknowledge that I know very little. And that is very liberating to me, is to realize just how much, it's just amazing how much, like how many different perspectives there can be of the same thing. And just when you think you find something, you meet someone who gives you a completely different outlook, and you're like, guess I didn't find it after all. You know? And that's a very healthy place to be, to not try and lock it down. I think a lot of times people try to find an answer. And I think a very healthy place to be, very liberated place to be, is to acknowledge either there is no answer or there are multiple answers.
Nice.
So The Untethered Soul is really good. Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, and pretty much anything by Stephen Mitchell. Buddhism Without Beliefs, or Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist. The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's just everybody has a different style of author that they prefer. Like, I really like Stephen Mitchell, but his writing is very academic. You know, and so that may not resonate with a lot of people, and I get all geekied out by it and nerded out, and I love it. But a lot of people prefer the more colloquial, Jack Kornfield or Eckhart Tolle. They're all wonderful, and that's what I love about all these authors that I consider that I'm working with. You know, that we're not in competition with each other. We all have the same message, and it's just one author may resonate with one person, whereas another one doesn't. Just like songs, and musicians, it's all art, it's all beautiful, but it doesn't all resonate with everyone.
Awesome. You listed 6 books and 3 authors, and I actually haven't read any of those, so that's good. A whole bunch of new recommendations for me.
If you go to my website, if you go to BuddhistBootcamp.com, there's a reading list of my recommended books. So there's your list for the year. I'll check in with you at the end of the year to see how many you've got.
Yeah, definitely.
Kind of on topic, what is the most valuable thing you've ever learned? And that might be through books or through a teacher or through meditation or anything.
Don't believe everything you think.
Yeah. Love it.
I think it's just to realize that feelings aren't facts. That's a very valuable one. Then you stop taking them so seriously. You stop taking things so personally. You realize, hey, it's not a fact. It's a feeling, and I can't make a decision based on that. I need to actually get some more information, and to not believe everything I think, because my thoughts are a product of such limited perception. We only see a 3-dimensional world, just like a camera captures only 2, but we're aware that there's so many dimensions at work that we just, so I take everything with a grain of salt. I have a lot of trust that everything will be okay, because it's always been okay. And I think every one of us can do that. Everything has worked out in your life so far, or you wouldn't be here. So your track record is 100%. You've survived everything that happened. You're likely to survive whatever comes next. And so I always suggest to people to proceed with curiosity, not caution.
Wow, nice.
And just stay curious. Yeah.
Nice. Amazing. Another one final gear change. We normally we normally put a link to either Amazon or Book Depository for people to buy the books. But I saw on your site, I bought Faithfully Religionless directly through your site because you have you've got a 1-for-1 there.
Yes. Whenever someone, I personally don't, a lot of authors and bookstores are very angry with Amazon because, Amazon is stealing business from I'm grateful that Amazon serves a wonderful purpose in making the books available in places that don't have bookstores. But when someone does order the book from me directly, for every book I sell, I also donate another copy of the book to the Prison Library Project. And that way you also get an autographed book or personalized if you want to give it as a gift to somebody. And the Prison Library Project has been a matter that's very dear to me. A lot of people give me a hard time for working with inmates, but I collaborate with organizations that teach inmates yoga and meditation. And they're very hungry for information in there. They want books, they want inspirational books that aren't necessarily religious, and there's very few. And the Prison Library Project receives 300 letters a week from inmates looking for books to read.
Wow.
And so, and they just donate them, and so I just give them books and I say, go, send it, spread it. And then, unbeknownst to me, at some point, then I received an invitation to go and speak to the inmates at one of the prisons. And before you know it, I'm meeting different inmates at different facilities and juvenile centers. And there are 6 schools now that made Buddhist boot camp part of their required reading curriculum. And so, nice. Whenever you're supporting a local business, you're often also supporting a lot of other things other than, say, Amazon.
Yeah.
But again, it depends. If somebody can only afford the book through Amazon, by all means, get it through Amazon. I just want to get the message out there.
Yeah.
That's my intention, and doesn't matter. And in fact, I always tell people, if you get a book, I want at least 4 different people to read your copy of the book. It's not about selling 5 more books. Like, don't, just keep sharing it. Don't ever let the book sit on a shelf. Just keep sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely love it. Cool. So we'll provide a link to the Prison Book Project, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that or whatever. I don't know what the situation's like in Australia with bookstores. I did a book tour across the entire east side of Australia a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And that was fantastic, and I'd love to come back.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's how I initially heard. My friend's mum went to the tour you did, so that's how I heard.
Oh, yeah.
It. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Do you know which event she came to?
It was she lives in Melbourne, I believe, but she said it was at least an hour out of the city. I don't remember where exactly, but it definitely was in the city. I
love these little corners that I found in either independent bookstores or yoga studios, and wherever it was fantastic, very welcoming audience. Australia was really good to me. I'd love to come back.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, definitely. Well, let us know if you do. A couple more quick questions. What else has the book done for you, or why did you do the book in the first place?
Oh, I never actually sat down to write the book. I never had a thought in my head like, oh, I'm going to be an author. When I was talking earlier about how I sold everything I owned and moved to Hawaii to live a simple life, naturally my friends and my family freaked out. They, like, what are you doing? You're leaving the job and the cars and all of that, and you're going to go do what? And so they asked me to keep in touch with them. So I started sending them a letter every month to let them know what's going on with me. And after about 8 years, my best friend said, those emails you've been sending us have been really helpful for me on my own journey as I try to figure out what life choices I have. And I think a lot of other people would benefit from reading those emails. And so, I compiled them all together as a blog, and then the blog went to a book, and then HarperCollins picked it up, and now it's in multiple languages. In fact, next month is the 4-year anniversary of Buddhist Boot Camp, and also when we'll be publishing it in Spanish. So it's in Spanish, French, and German, and Dutch, and Chinese. And Polish, I think, is coming. So it really took a life of its own, and all thanks to my friend Kim. It was her idea, and I'm very grateful. Every time someone thanks me for the book, I say, thank Kim. It was her idea.
Well, thanks, Kim.
And then the second book was just a direct result of the tour across the US, the UK, and Australia. I met many people like you who loved the book, but they wanted to hear, like you said, the story behind it. Like, tell me more, your story, like the memoir. And that's when I actually returned from New Zealand. That's when I said I need to write this down, and that's when the second book was born.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So thank you for both your books and your time today. We definitely learned a lot from both, and speaking to you today, definitely one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm ever down there, I think we can all go hiking. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
100%,
definitely.
Man.
Love it.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much, Timber. And all the
Thank you.
best.
Have a great day. I apologize for the technical difficulties we had.
I think we got through it. All
did.
good.
All right, guys. Talk to you later.
See you, brother. Thanks, guys, for listening.
We hope you enjoyed that interview. We got a lot out of it, and I'm sure you did too.
Guys, if there's one thing you can do for us, it'd be hit subscribe or write a review. It means give us good ratings on iTunes so more people are listening to our shit.
Yep. Even mention it to one friend and say, there's two blokes there, all right? And
Yeah, it, man. Sure, fair.